15 Fabulous FX Founders. PEO Chapter FX Iowa was organized with 15 founding sisters on February 27, 1922. So 2022 will be our 100th anniversary. After joining FX, I started wondering about these ladies and began researching them with the help of the Paulina Times Archives, the Paulina Centennial History Book, another book entitled The History of O'Brien County, and the Find a Grave website. With those resources, I was able to put together a short history of most of the sisters, including those that were buried and where they were buried. I learned that 6 rest eternally at our Prairie View Cemetery. I got excited about doing a cemetery walk, but soon realized that was not a good option for our group. In talking with Mariah, she said, "Let's find a way to bring the cemetery to our meeting." And that's what we've prepared for you. We hope you enjoy it. Susan Bachman. Before her marriage to Edward Bachman, Susan taught 3rd and 4th grade as Miss Hanson. Married in 1902, the couple lived in Paulina, Rockwell City, and Manson, all in Iowa, and also near Evanston, Illinois. Edward was born in Austria, coming to America with his parents in 1881. For 50 years, he was a merchant and a businessman. Susan was the daughter of a Paulina pioneer family, Charlotte and Anton Hansen. Active in Paulina, Susan served as worthy matron of the Order of Eastern Star for a number of years and was a member of the Presbyterian Church. As a charter member of Chapter FX Iowa, she served as the group's first president. Edward died in 1954. Susan moved to Omaha in 1990 to live with her son and his family until her death in 1967 at the age of 90. Both are buried here in Paulina. Bird Harris. Bird was the daughter of George and Margaret Raw, born in 1875. She attended school in Mount Vernon and graduated from Cornell College in 1899. She later moved to Paulina. She married George W. Harris in 1900. The couple were active and consistent members of the Methodist Episcopalian Church. 4 sons were born to them. Willing to work for the welfare of his hometown, George served as treasurer of the school for more than 20 years, served in a capacity as a city councilman for 10 years, volunteered with the fire department for 10 years. From 1930 to 33, he was the town clerk. For a few years, he was a member of the library trustees and served as the director of the telephone company. He was employed at the bank developed by George Hakeman and his dad at Farmers State Bank. I didn't learn much about Bird. She was a charter member of the Order of Eastern Star in Paulina and was recognized for her 50-year membership, as well as a charter member of FX Paulina. Her sister-in-law was Alberta Raw. George, 60, died in 1935. Son Ken, 8 in 1930, and Dudley was 30 in 1937. Bird in 1955, just short of her 80th birthday. All 4 are buried at Prairie View, but there's no stone for Bird or her sister. A few months after I wrote this, I met Mike and Evelyn Harris from Georgia. They were staying at the White House Inn. Mike is the grandson of Bird and George Harris. His grandparents lived where Joni Hurtig lives now. He was also told of Bird's brother, George Thomas Raw. He built what's now the White House Inn, the Sea House, you know, that ugly yellow one, and the home of Renee and Red Wagner on the south corner. Brother George and his wife lived in the Wagner house. Bird's sister Stella, who never married, lived in the White House Inn. She taught piano lessons and is buried here on the Harris lot. Unfortunately, no stone has ever been placed for the 2 ladies. Stella was initiated into PEO FX Iowa in April of 1923 in the first class of initiates, along with Gertrude Madam and Mrs. A.L. Livingston. Mike is the son of Dudley Raw, who was fatally injured when struck by lightning while playing golf near his home in Florida. Mike was only 18 months old at the time. He's buried at Prairie View with his parents and brother. Our next sister is Jane Metcalf. This name, although often remembered, is difficult to trace. The more research I did, the more confused I became. Our home was a Metcalf home in the Metcalf edition of Paulina. There was a newspaper article that read, "The Metcalfs are moving into their new home in the north part of town. This residence is one of the finest among them." Which Metcalf is unclear. The Metcalf name is attached to the history of a bank and an elevator. Articles about P.E.O. often refer to Jane as Mrs. John Metcalf, but there was more than one John and more than one Jane that lived in the Paulina-Primgar area. I believe our sister was Jane Bosworth Metcalf, wife of John Thomas, sometimes referred to as J. Metcalf Jr., through marriage making her the niece of Bird Harris and Stella Raw. Jane was treasurer of FX for many years and frequently played the piano. It appears the couple liked to travel, entertain, and were involved in many social activities. The couple had at least one son and one daughter. They moved to South Dakota in 1932, where Jane stayed involved in P.E.O. In 1936, she remitted to Green Bay, Wisconsin, went inactive in 1943, and was reinstated in 1948. Then she remitted to Long Beach, California in 1952. It is there that she passed away in 1960. Grace Cannon. Grace Jennings was born in Iowa Falls in 1873. At age 11, she moved with her parents to a ranch in California. Later, for a short time, they lived in Lewiston, Idaho. She attended the Iowa State Teachers College and taught school in and around the Paulina area. In 1893, she and several from the area attended the Chicago World's Fair. The students of an art teacher, Zula Dudley, had won an entry at the World's Fair. In June of 1896, the Presbyterian Church was the setting for the quiet and simple marriage of Grace to Charles Cannon. They honeymooned at his parents' home in Tennessee, accompanied by his brother Harry. The first 2 years of marriage, they made their home in Granville before moving to Paulina. Mr. Cannon was born and raised in Philadelphia, Tennessee. He was a graduate of the University of Tennessee in 1886. Shortly after graduation, he and his brother engaged in the grain business with Wilbert Metcalf. Charles's name was associated with Metcalf and Cannon Elevator, the Buell and Cannon Lumber, and in general farming. Charles was recorded for making many trips to Tennessee, where his family remained. This article was in the January 24th, 1910 Times. The most attractive dogfight seen around here for some time was pulled off Wednesday, when Dr. Dudley and Charles Cannon's dogs got in a stranglehold on each other. Doc and Charlie got their respective canines by the hind legs to pull them apart, but there was nothing doing until they pounded the pup's nose with a club. The scrap happened just as the morning passenger train was coming in. Some of the passengers got out on the platform and were so interested they nearly got left. George, in 1924, and Mary, 1958, were the parents of 5 children. 2 of their children died at age 6, William in 1903 and Mary in 1914. At the time of Grace's death, 2 of the 3 remaining daughters resided in Tennessee and 1 in Iowa. Grace took an inactive status from P.E.O. in 1950 and died in 1958. Charles, Grace, and 2 of their youth are buried at Prairie View. Jean Scott Cohen. Jean was a descendant of Paulina pioneers. Her parents, Alexander and Helen Scott, came to America from Scotland in 1881. Jean was 13 at the time and one of 10 siblings. The railroad came to the area in 1882 and Paulina was formed. The First Presbyterian Church was organized January 10, 1882 at the Alexander Scott home and was called the Scotch Presbyterian Church of O'Brien County. There wasn't anything found in the paper until Jean wed John Cohen Jr. at her parents' home in 1902. After the wedding festivities, the couple left for a month's tour. They went to Chicago and on to Toronto, Canada. John had been born in Canada of Scottish descent. Jean spent some years as a stenographer. John's first business venture was harnesses. From that, he went into the elevator and the stock business, and he continued on to become a successful auctioneer. John died in 1907. The couple's only son, Oliver, was born in 1904. Jean moved with Oliver to Windham, Minnesota in 1925, and after 17 years they moved to Evanston, Illinois in 1942. Oliver died in 1946 of a heart ailment. Jean died in Kendallville, Indiana in May of 1948, where she had made her home with her niece for the past 8 months, attaining the age of 80. She had gone active from P.E.O. in 1937. Jean, John, and Oliver are buried here at Prairie View. Hilma Thatcher. Hilma Johnson came to America at the age of 21 months with her parents from Sweden. They settled near Marcus. She was baptized and confirmed in the Lutheran faith. She is a graduate of the Sherwood Conservatory of Chicago. She was an able pianist and a vocal teacher. Hilma served as organist and choir of the Paulina Presbyterian Church for 19 years. She hosted or directed many concerts and recitals during her time in Paulina. Hilma was an FX charter member, and she organized the Federated Music Club and belonged to the Order of Eastern Star. Hilma married J.W.E. Thatcher in 1908 in Emmitsburg. Mr. Thatcher lived most of his pre-marriage life in Hartley. He was a lawyer by profession and served as clerk of District Court of O'Brien County. 2 sons were born to the Thatchers. The first died in infancy. Mr. Thatcher died in 1934. Hilma moved to Sioux Falls following his death. She died there in 1962, 5 years after her son Sherwin Yale had died at age 43. There is a Thatcher headstone with J.W.E.'s footstone here at Prairie View. Ida Oldegg. Ida Maycomb Oldegg served Paulina as the town librarian for 17 years. Previous to being appointed the librarian for $30 a month, Ida had served on the library board beginning in 1927 and to the appointment in 1947. Born in 1884 in Benton County, Iowa, she was a PHS and University of Iowa graduate and taught in the Paulina and Cleghorn school systems for 11 years. Ida and Dr. George, a physician in Paulina, were married quietly in the Presbyterian Church manse in 1915. George began practicing medicine in Paulina in 1912 in the upstairs of a bank. He practiced family medicine and was an area surgeon for 30 years until his death in 1943. Ida's paternal grandmother, Eliza McComb, lived for a time with the Oldeggs in 1931 due to an illness. Ida joined the First Presbyterian Church in 1897 and was a charter FX and P.E.O. And she was also a charter member of the Paulina Women's Study Club, which was a member of the Book Club. She was also a 50-year member of the Order of the Eastern Star. I found many references to her playing bridge and giving book reports. The headline from the Paulina Times in 1962. Paulina chapter of P.E.O. commemorates its 40th anniversary with a special program. Recently, FX chapter of P.E.O. Sisterhood in Paulina commemorated its 40th anniversary of the organization at the home of Mrs. John Schultz. An original poem by Mrs. Linford Pauling was read depicting the 40 years of life of FX. Mrs. Ida Oldegg, a charter member, reminisced about the early years in the chapter. A congratulatory letter from Mrs. Evelyn Bleezer of Cherokee, another charter member, was read. After a brief ceremony honoring her service through the years, Mrs. Oldegg was presented a Marguerite Guard by the chapter. A white and gold anniversary cake, decorated by Mrs. William Sim, was served at the close of the meeting. Individual favors were made by Mrs. Philip Peterson. Dr. Aldag died in 1943, Ida in 1967. Both are buried here at Prairie View. They were survived by one son and one daughter. Loretta Browning. In 1920, the Polina School had a new crop of teachers, among them Mrs. Loretta Browning from Lebanon, Missouri, who will be the high school principal and instruct high school English. The Thursday, May 25, 1922, Polina Times has this article on this charter member. A farewell party was given by Chapter FX last evening at the home of Mrs. J.T. Metcalf, honoring Mrs. Loretta Browning and Miss Neva Camry, two members of the chapter who have been teachers here but will not be returning next year. A delicious two-course supper was served at 6 p.m., the guest of honor finding corsage bouquets of sweet peas and lily of the valley at their places. Two vocal numbers, a vocal by Mrs. J.W.E. Thatcher and a duet by Mrs. Thatcher and Mrs. A.P. Scott with Mrs. Metcalf at the piano, was a very pleasing feature of the evening. At the time the FX turned 50, corresponding secretary Betty Sim sent out many letters to follow up on our founders. She was able to track down that Loretta demitted to Lebanon, Missouri in 1925. They also confirmed that she had died in 1943 at the age of 74. Loretta is buried in the Lebanon City Cemetery of Missouri. I could find no information on her husband, J.B. Ethel Draper, born in 1876. Ethel was 25 years old when Chapter FX were formed. Her husband, A.J., Artis, served as the superintendent of the Polina Public Schools from 1920 to 1923, a job that paid $2,800 a year. There were not a lot of entries in the Polina Times for Ethel. They often entertained teachers in their home, and she often visited friends in Des Moines. While A.J. was superintendent of schools in Pocahontas, Ethel visited her mother, Mary Garland, of Venice, California. It was at the home of her mother, Ethel, committed suicide at the age of 33 in 1930. She left a note in which she said she was despondent over ill health. Her husband and only daughter, Virginia, reported she had tried twice before to take her life. Ethel, an artist who died in 1975, are buried in Corydon Cemetery in Wayne County, Iowa, which is in south-central Iowa. Zula May Dudley. Dr. and Mrs. E. Dudley became residents of Polina in 1886 and wholeheartedly were active in the educational and social life of the community. Elwyn was a physician and a surgeon on South Main Street, and Zula was a high school art teacher. Her students submitted a relief map project to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, for which they won a prize. Zula, as well as a charter member of FX in 1922, was a 1902 charter member of the Sweet Briar Order of Eastern Star and served as their organist. She was a lifelong member of the Methodist Church. Dr. and Mrs. Dudley moved to Inglewood, California in 1930 to be near their only child, a daughter, Myrn. Zula died in 1944 as an active member of P.E.O. and is buried in Inglewood. I could not find a birth date or any other information on Zula. Lyda Clausen. Personally, I felt this sister has by far the saddest story. Born in 1879 in Webster City, her grandfather Hunter nicknamed his first grandchild Dot, and so she was always called. Educated in Webster City, after high school she worked for the editor, her grandfather, of the Webster City Freeman newspaper. She soon was his right-hand man of this father-granddaughter and grandfather combination. She knew the work of the newspaper from the ground up. Carrying white roses in 1906, she wed Richard Clausen in her parents' home. Richard was the city attorney and dabbled in the newspaper business. After a year or two together, they moved to Carroll, Nebraska, and started a small newspaper. In 1913, they moved to Sanborn, again for the newspaper. In 1916, they moved to Paulina, where they obtained ownership of the Paulina Times, for which Letta was very well suited. Around 1909, Letta took into her care her niece, Corintha, only hours old. Letta was active in P.E.O., was a member of a committee of the State Federation of Women's Clubs. Letta was active in the Congregational and later the Presbyterian church life. On Monday evening, November 1922, Letta participated in the program of the local P.E.O. chapter, which she was hosting their annual guest day gathering. The Paulina Times reported what took place Friday of that same week. The loving, tender beckoning of the Father had not been anticipated either by her or those on earth who loved and cherished her most. The last few months of Mrs. Clausen's life were among the happiest of those she spent on earth. She was patiently waiting the glory of her womanhood. Her hometown reported that Mr. and Mrs. Hunter received crushing news this morning of the sudden death of their daughter, Mrs. Richard Clausen, in childbirth in her home in Paulina. Letta was 43. In September of 1928, the Sioux City Journal ran a story on the suicide death of her husband, Richard Clausen, in a Sioux City hotel. Hotel attendants became alarmed when he did not appear on Sunday morning. Peering through the keyhole, they discerned his body laying on the floor. Entrance to the hotel room by authorities was gained with a crowbar. He had shot himself with a .22 caliber revolver, leaving envelopes addressed to two of his nieces on the dresser. Family members said the death of his wife 6 years ago was a hard blow to him, which was a deep and abiding grief. Richard was 52. The couple's foster daughter was living with Richard in Paulina at the time of his death. Both Letta and Richard are buried at Graceland Cemetery, Webster City, Iowa. Jenny Biddle Scott. Of all I researched, by far this one proved very difficult. The only mention of her being treasurer for the local order of Eastern Star. Then in 1938 she returned to the 16th anniversary party of P.E.O. Of her husband Andrew, well, there were mentions of him being a track star, being in a black-face talent show, and belonging to the Methodist Church. No wedding, no social civic activities, no obituaries. When I went through Betty Sims' research of X's 50th anniversary, I found a letter written to Betty by Jenny herself. It reads, April 19th, 1972. Dear Sister of P.E.O., Sister Sims' letter was sent to me by Chapter AZ of Inglewood, California. So many phases of life have occurred since we lived in Paulina. Sometimes it seems like a dream. My husband, Andrew Scott, was cashier of the bank in Paulina that was owned by the Metcalf estate. George Raw, president. We left Paulina in 1925 for California because of my health. Mr. Scott was in charge of the loan department in the bank at Inglewood, California for 17 years, and we then came to Phoenix, Arizona. Eventually, Mr. Scott became chief accountant of the Valley National Insurance Company of Phoenix, chiefly owned by Valley National Bank, and he remained with them until retirement. We brought our Methodist Church letter from Inglewood, and I am a member here. Mr. Scott passed away in 1967. I had major surgery for the deterioration of spinal vertebrae in 1964 and have never fully recovered. I made a trip to Mayo Clinic in 1968. Very little help could be given me. I trust in the Lord. I maintain my home here in Phoenix, having no children or close relatives. I can get about the house in a wheelchair, and a lady comes in to help with everything. I have always loved P.E.O., but not at all able to participate. Bernie Smith Wood, who was from Paulina, lives in the Mesa, Arizona. A lovely person, and I love her much. My love goes out to all of Chapter FX, and I have lovely thoughts of Paulina. Warm-hearted people, and especially some very excellent cooks. The grief over my husband lingers. Love, Jenny Scott. Alberta Raw. Little could be obtained on Alberta Baker Raw. Alberta became the bride of George Raw at her parents' home in Gilman, Iowa, the center part of the state. In 1890, Mrs. John Metcalf tendered a reception for the couple in the Metcalf home. George was the assistant cashier at the Paulina Bank. In 1909, George and Alberta Raw had a 2-week trip to Minneapolis where they took a river cruise, visiting several points along the way. And Alberta, in addition to being a PEO, was a member of the Order of Eastern Star. Around 1928, the Raws moved to California, and Alberta demitted to Chapter DX in Santa Ana. She demitted to GJ, also in California, in 1930. Alberta and George Thomas Raw both died in 1958. They are buried in Glendale, LA County, California. Neva Camry. We are now in the Sutherland Waterman Cemetery, where Miss Neva Camry was a longtime Sutherland native. She graduated from Sutherland High School and attended Iowa State Teachers College for 3 years and received her degree from the University of Iowa in 1929 to teach domestic science, home economics. She did graduate work at the University of Colorado and the University of Iowa. Her career has been continuous teaching, except for 1 year off. Paulina, Sibley, Everly, Hartley, Sutherland. She retired in 1960. In June of 1974, Miss Camry was presented a 52-year Certificate of Recognition from P.E.O. FX in the home of Mrs. Lester Minke. In retirement, Neva locally took many prizes for her floral arrangements. Miss Camry died in 1983 at age 84 in Fort Dodge, where she had resided for a couple of years. She's buried here in the Waterman Cemetery. Pauline Blazer. There's not much in the Paulina Times regarding this charter member of FX. Louise Evelyn was born in 1873, raised and educated in the Cherokee area. She married Walter in 1904 in Cherokee, and their first home was in Aurelia. Her husband Walter was a well-known druggist in Paulina and partnered with his brother-in-law William Eschliman to form the Blazer Eschliman Drugstore Company, carrying Rexall and American Drug Syndicate goods. The Blazers cared for Evelyn's mother, Amanda Eschlim, who died in their home in April of 1920. While in Paulina, the Blazers were friendly with the Van Zwals and the Kislingberries. Walter passed away in 1939, and it appears Evelyn in 1949 was making her home in San Marino, California. On a visit to Paulina, FX complimented her with a covered dish picnic supper on Friday evening in the city park. Evelyn in 1963 resided in Sunrise Manor in Sioux City. She took inactive status from PEO in 1964 and passed away in 1969 at the age of 96. The Blazers are interned here in Oak Hill Cemetery, Cherokee. We hope you have enjoyed this cemetery tour as much as Mariah and I did preparing it for you. Like the original 7 founding sisters, Mary, Alice, Hattie, Suella, Fran, Alice, and Ella over 150 years ago, and the 15 sisters that founded FX Iowa, Susan, Bird, Jane, Grace, Jean, Hilma, Ida, Neva, Evelyn, Ethel, Loretta, Lida, Zula, Jenny, and Alberta did 100 years ago, and as we do today, we continue to adhere to the qualities of faith, love, purity, justice, and truth.